questions, which I will start with a non-question, which is to tell you what Rogit's, is that how you pronounce it?
Sure.
Rogit's? It's Rogit's. Roget's thesaurus, Bartlett's, actually, I should be more clear. Bartlett's Roget's thesaurus, published by Little, Brown, defines or suggests synonyms for experimental as being theoretical. So there's theoretical, clumsy, which I always thought was weird, but it's in there, so we have to take this into account. Yeah. Clumsy. What are the assholes? Yeah, right? So theoretical, clumsy, skeptical, okay, original, discovering, tentative, uncustomary, and one that relates in my mind to clumsy, uncertified. So my first question to the general public, if not our performers in general, would be, if you had a question for these performers, based on the performances you've seen them give tonight, what would it be, and would you feel comfortable asking it right now?
Big spoon or little spoon?
What was that?
Try to change it up.
Well, I would ask Sean Lee, how does he classify his own music?
I guess mostly I don't classify it.
So like a lot of spoken word, a big spoken word element there, right? Did you write the?
Well, you have your question is specifically to the performance you saw tonight.
Yeah.
So this piece that you wrote for tonight, you're talking about.
Oh, is that right? So it's not
Yeah.
always, it's like not
Right.
the typical.
Well, this is something I do a lot when I do solo performances, but otherwise not like when I play with ensembles. I don't tend to do a lot of spoken word. Sometimes if something grips me, I feel like I have to talk. It happens, but this was all planned. And this was all also composed instead of improvised. Often improvised.
How do you think improvisation relates to classifications of experimentality for anybody?
They're probably easy to correlate. Improvisation.
Well, there's classifications that are based around improvisation, just free improv, free the non-idiomatic improv. So like where that's a precursor to that being part of the genre, you have to be improvising. But I think there's also a lot of experimental music where there are levels of indeterminacy, which could be seen as is indeterminacy and improvisation necessarily correlated entirely, or and so it's like in Sean's piece, it's indeterminate in sections of it. Not every single sound is noted like in classical music, but I feel like I'm getting off topic. I'm starting to ramble.
No, indeterminacy is really on point with this.
Yeah.
What do you mean by idiomatic?
Within a discernible genre that most people could pick out.
Does that make it more, if there are idiomatic elements, does that make it part of an experimental process because it's research, or does it make it less a part of it because it's already thought out?
Well, I take issue with you equating research and experimental, which is fair in a scientific context, but I don't necessarily think it is necessarily within relation to how at least I can't speak for how I approach music. I mean, sometimes yes, but not always. But I'm getting off topic. I'm sorry. Can you just say the section?
No, you were
answered, right.
I don't know that we have to stay on topic.
Okay,
we can
good.
kind of like be here.
Yes, Robert.
Sometimes when looking to define something, it's good to go back to the point at which you first felt you were doing it. For the performers, for anyone, when did you start to feel like you were creating something experimental, particularly for people who studied music formally. There was a point of departure from what you were doing. And if you can get back to that point where you started to feel like you were making something experimental, that might help to define it.
For me, it was about getting away from like song forms, and I don't know, other people come from such varied backgrounds, but I was like writing pop songs, and I just like discovered the world of improvisation, and there were these parallel things I did, evolved separately, and then one day I just dropped the whole separate thing, and I started performing improvisation, and I think that's when it felt like I really didn't know what was going to happen in the performance. So, but that said, like, and in response to what you were asking about improvisation before, like, I feel like what I'm doing is at its best when I can't classify it, when I can't define it, and when I actually don't, I wouldn't be able to tell you to what extent I was improvising or playing material, because I'm using material, but like, it's just getting so mangled.
Does eventually, since like you, after you've played a number of shows, does it seem to feel like rehearsed though? Even so, like after you like improvising, like do you still find yourself like getting into like a rhythm or like repeating certain elements?
It gets more set over time, but I also feel like I have more room to like, I gain, after I perform the same, I call them pieces, it's like collection of material that happens in any order. I start to just do it in a more similar order that seems natural, and it's weird. I think it does become composed, and then I usually just like move on and write something new at that point. It's kind of, yeah.
I guess I have like a very naive question for maybe all of you or anyone of you. So if, I guess like I'm just curious if you consider your music or what you're doing experimental, can you articulate via words what are you experimenting?
With bass.
Huh?
With bass, like low frequencies. That's my experience. Although I don't like the word experimental.
And I guess to like connected to that, if you're experimenting something, is there success and failure? And can you articulate that via words, like in a context like this?
I don't think that there is, for me, as much of a sense of success and failure. Because even if like what I plan to do doesn't happen, I know for a fact that that's like almost illegible to the audience, because with what am I experimenting? I think it's like, for me it's like when things happen in time. There's a bunch of things that are going to happen when they're launched. And so I don't know, it's probably different for everyone.
But not including setup.
What's that?
Not including the time of setup.
No.
Yeah, I think I'm a believer of like performance and sound happening all the time, and I think that's a great viewpoint to have. I mean, just personally, it's something like as soon as I kind of discovered that like I didn't need to like be in a certain mode to like view a performance. I could just like see the world and think about it, and think about what it means for what we're doing, the things we're doing all the time. So like it's become kind of a trope to say like, you know, performance is happening all the time. But I think it's like, I don't know, once I sort of figured that out, like things became very interesting. And I think that like for you, I think Anastasia, the setup I think is a very important part, and I think that's a very like unconnectable part of the performance.
That's a good point.
Totally. And I've always joked like, you know, like, again, you'd made the joke too that the performance was over, like as soon as it kind of everything set up, you know what I mean? That would make John Cage proud, and, you know, but like, experiments. I think the
Why don't you like the term experimental, Edward?
Experimental's, I don't know, because I feel like everything's so genre-fied. I just made up a word, but like.
It's a good word.
I use that. I also don't really like the term experimental very much because I mean, to me, it just has a like a scientific connotation. Like I'm trying to see if something works or not. And I guess like honestly, the only experimenting I try to do is like at home by myself. Or when I'm performing, it's like hopefully, even though I've improvised, I'm hoping for it to be purposeful in some way. It's not like it can always can't control everything. There's a lot of things that will happen, both like the ambient situation and the people you're playing with. But nonetheless, I'm not trying to prove anything. I feel like experiments are kind of the point of them.
Well, that's two people. We now find out that we all hate the word experimental.
I don't hate it, but I think it's like, who is it? Like, it's like any other genre term, if you're using it as that, it's like who needs it is like not the musician or the artist. Like I don't need genre terms. It's not what I'm thinking about when I make it, but it's convenient for other people when they ask. I use it as a term of convenience because it's like, I remember trying to describe my music to a coworker who'd never seen like music other than like what's on television and radio. And I described to her like the tools. I was trying to like not, talk down or like be like, yeah, I'm a total weirdo, and just be like, I record bits and pieces myself and play them back, and I send them through these things. And she's like, oh, cool. So like Pink Floyd. And I was like, if I could just say, oh yeah, but like, more experimental. Like she like.
But
That
experimental
helps.
does become kind of a catch-all
Mhm.
at the end of the whole list of genres, and then you have experimental.
Yeah, it's